10-minute stop. The man whom he went to see in Chicago was not in town. He's gone on a lake cruise, said his secretary, and he won't be back till the latter part of the month. Luke couldn't believe that the man was really gone. But I wrote him that I was coming, and he promised to see me. It's very important. Terribly important. It's about a job. You see, he knows a cousin of mine. And my cousin? He'll return about the 23rd of the month, the girl interrupted. See him then. She swung crisply back to the machine, her face like a door slamming shut against his. He felt indignant and couldn't curb his tongue. What the hell does that boss of yours think I am? I haven't got money enough to chase him back and forth across the country. Spent my last cent nearly making this trip up here to see him, and God only knows. She gripped the phone. Shall I call the watchman, or will you get out? He took the evening bus back to Memphis, rented a pillow for 15 cents because the thought of another sleepless night actually terrified him. He didn't feel like himself. He felt as though the thread of his identity had snapped, and he was moving on with nothing at all left behind him. The bus was a long time loading. Beginning to feel panicky, he clasped the pillow under his arm and darted out of the Blue Flyer over to the station drugstore, where he purchased a pint of whiskey. Came back with the bottle stuffed in the pillow, hoping that he wouldn't get hungry on the way home. He had 30 cents left. He sat on the back seat. It extended clear across the back of the bus so that if nobody else occupied it, he would be able to stretch himself out. But a young Negro came and sat down close beside him. Then a woman with a baby. Italians, and by the smell of the paper boxes which she spread across the remaining vacant space, he judged them to be transcontinental travelers. Redolent of soft bananas and unwashed diapers. It was stiflingly close, the bus not yet started. The young Negro looked at him and grinned. He tried to grin back, but his lips were stiff. This alarmed him still more, not even able to crack a smile. Defiantly, he took the bottle out of the pillow and drank. Lucky, murmured the Negro, rolling his eyes at the ceiling. Luke offered him a drink. Was afterwards sorry as the Negro waxed voluble. Showed Luke his taped knuckles. Knocked a white boy out last night in the 4th round. Did better, remarked Luke, than Joe Louis, which started the Negro off on what promised to be interminable. How far are you going? Luke cut in. Champaign. That's where I live. How far is that? 150 mile? Well, from then on, thought Luke, maybe I'll get some sleep. He started dozing, however, before they were clear of the city. It was a restless, enervating sleep. He woke up at intervals of every 15 or 20 minutes, opened his eyes to find the bus moving each time through dusk a few shades deeper, till finally it was quite dark and they were out of the city, and only dark, level fields were sliding past with an occasional yellow light of a farmhouse. Voices droned ahead of him. The young Negro committed himself as earnestly to sleep as to battle, snoring upon a long, rasping note, his shoulders swaying rhythmically against Luke's, his bandaged hand dangling between his legs. Luke regarded him with admiration and envy. The Negro represented, he thought, something splendid and heroic, something that made life possible under any circumstances, a kind of impregnable simplicity, a completeness, an undividedness. The boxer sleeps, thought Luke. An exact statement, said all that was necessary to say. Luke glanced at the Negro and seemed to see his life in graphic design, a strong black line pushing stubbornly forward without a curve. Beside it, his own life, a wavering thread of gray. Not even that anymore. The thread broken, lost in space that stretched terrifyingly about him. The bus lurched. The baby woke up and whined a little, and the mother comforted it in a low voice. Luke took another long drink and drifted back into sleep. It seemed endless. He could stay neither asleep nor awake. Being completely wakeful would be better than this intermittent dozing, this constant jarring out of sleep and back into it. His brain felt stunned. He wanted to think. There were things that he needed to think out before the bus reached Memphis, but couldn't. Then suddenly the lights flared up and he found that the bus had stopped moving. It was standing in the business section of a small city. The Negro pugilist had gotten up and was lifting his suitcase down from the rack. The woman with the baby had already disappeared. "What's this place?" Luke inquired sleepily of the Negro grinning down at him. "This here's Champagne," the Negro yelled jubilantly as he swung the suitcase to his shoulder. "Home for me, but for you just a 10-minute stop." "Good luck," said Luke. "Same to you, boy," sang the Negro. The dozing passenger stirred fretfully. Luke glanced at the now completely vacant back seat. All the boxes gone. He hardly dared to trust in the miracle of their removal. Then he got to his feet and stumbled out of the bus. On the street, it seemed much cooler. There was a freshness in the air. Must have been raining lately. Yes, there were puddles of rainwater in the street, and the lighted windows of the cafe were still streaming. Looked pretty from the outside. The lights and the moving forms diffused. He opened the screen door. Inside, electric fans were droning. In the rear, a Brunswick selector being played. Nasal tenor inquiring if it was true what they said about Dixie. Luke grinned to himself. Did they really flog women down there? But the tune was light and infectious. It shocked him a little out of his daze. The place was full of young fellows. In one corner they were playing a game, shooting marbles into little sockets. Others were seated about a porcelain-topped table drinking beer. Champaign was a college town. Champaign and Urbana, University of Illinois. These must be summer students. He remembered his own college days a few years back and felt a nostalgic pang. Grinned ironically to himself. Sat down at the counter but could think of nothing that he wanted. Just as well. 30 cents in all the next day. "Glass of milk," he ordered, finally, in a low voice. Perhaps it would help him to get some real sleep now that he had the whole back seat to himself. When he'd finished drinking the milk, he went back outside. Next to the cafe was a small open lot containing lighted billboards. He sat on a low wooden fence and stared at a poster advertising a coming show. Jane Barlow and Stark Navel in Sacramento. Navel's head glittered darkly like the back of a cockroach. Nevertheless, it was a nice-looking sign. The colors were bright, but not glaring. Like the dresses that girls wear at summer dances, it had an air of pleasing insouciance, which said, in effect, "The world is like this, very gay." Somewhere in the wet grass, a cricket began chirping. A young couple strolled by. He heard their low voices. "You know I didn't mean it that way," murmured the young man. "How did you mean it then?" she lisped babyishly. The words were like the movement of a body in the dark, a female body arching itself slowly upwards against the male pressure. He felt in his own loins the sweet answering thrill, clenched his fist as he gazed after the girl's figure. White dress, expansive hips. The young man's arms slid carefully about the waist. Nothing hurried. Plenty of time. Movement of bodies in the dark. Now, in light, appeared distinctly for an instant in the yellow pool through the dripping cafe windows, their shadows flying out to prodigious lengths across the dim street, and then their self-absorbed figures re-swallowed by night. He gulped and looked again at the movie poster. Jane Barlow had gorgeous breasts. In her picture, she always wore gowns cut down low at the neck. You could often see the little groove between the two delectable promontories of her bust. Her hips were ample, too. They swayed when she walked even better than those of April East, who was corseted a little too tightly. And she had a way of looking at a man with her lips parted and her eyes opened wide. Wouldn't kick her out of bed, he reflected dully. Then ceased thinking about the poster. Listened to the crickets chirping. What's he talking to himself about? Refined old ladies making conversation on the church lawn. Or Professor Abbott on restoration drama. Reading passages from Venice Preserved or Cato or Conquest of Granada. The long heroic speeches of Almanzaro or Belvidera declaiming windily of love. Of love, of love. Luke grinned. Those were living people, too, those restoration poets. Thomas Otway was alive once. So were Addison and Dryden. They believed a great deal of what they wrote, or thought that they believed it. Heroic tragedy and heroic love. And all the while in private, people were doing and thinking what they were doing and thinking today. Exactly the same thing in the same way. The vicious intrigues, constantly draining their passion like running sores on prostitute flesh. And toilets that didn't flush. And the dangers of bathing in fresh air in winter. And the rotting teeth. And horse dung all over the narrow streets. And the diseases, and the deaths, and the ignorance, and the masses suffering and dying ignominiously while the nobility wept for the plight of sweet Belvidera, or applauded the wit of perfumed fops. Extremes of sentimentality and of cynicism. The life at Whitehall no less extravagant than a Wycherley farce. The king's mistress threatening to have a miscarriage if she didn't get the first ride in his new French calichet. 70,000 dying in London of the plague. 13,000 homes destroyed by one fire. And all of that happened and was allowed to happen. And the rich and the poor alike lived and died. The fawning poets, the lewd and elegant lords, the prudish lascivious ladies, the diseased and ignorant multitudes. All of these lived and died upon the earth, and nothing was done about it. The pretty and dully saccharine poems were preserved. The heroic tragedies were sacredly kept for posterity. Discreetly, all that was terrible and dark in the individual lives of the people was left unsaid and forgotten. Over and done long ago. Doesn't count anymore. New people to cover the earth these days. And the earth still merrily reeling through space, throwing off gay sparks toward those problematical beings on Mars. And I being here, thought Luke. That's the strangest of all. I somehow part of all this, accidentally involved, a part of the general iridescence, a bit of spume in the flying tide, I being here. Somehow extraordinary, beyond all measure, sitting on the top rail of a low fence in the middle of the night. Here in a strange town, looking at a colored poster, thinking about restoration poets and the universe and social injustice, all without rhyme or reason. Listening to the chirping of a cricket in a field of wet grass. Astonishing, isn't it? 10-minute stop in a strange town. Home for me, but for you, just a 10-minute stop. I get you, thought Luke. I don't belong. I'm not one of the actors. That's why I am able to sit here and look at the show. No, I'm not really a part of it. Not one of the dramatis personae. Not dark enough or light enough. Not enough, what do they call it? Centrifugal force? Specific gravity? Let it go at that. Here again his thoughts trailed off into nothing, and he only heard the chirping of the cricket in the wet grass. Katie did. Did she, Katie? Did she, kid? It seemed a sort of pointedly foolish commentary upon the fact of existence. Luke smiled to himself. It was pleasant, really, to be sitting here. Coolness of night air, fresh smell of recent rain on the grass, voices of unknown people, and faint strains of music from a bright cafe. Quite pleasant. But what connection did it have with him? None whatsoever. These 10 minutes had absolutely no bearing upon anything that had gone before or anything that might conceivably come after. Perhaps that was why he found this brief space of time so peculiarly agreeable. He seemed to be removed from the ordinary stream of life for this short interval, and to be looking back or down upon himself with an air of quiet detachment. A kind of catharsis. It was like being very drunk. Was he perhaps very drunk? Luke smiled to himself. Perhaps that was it, but not in the usual fashion. An intensifying of perceptions rather than the usual fantastic diffusion. He smiled to himself and turned his face back toward the street with an increased alertness. Felt himself vividly alive and upon the verge of taking some kind of definite action. At this moment, the college boys were crowding out of the cafe door. Behind them, the proprietor was shouting loud, outraged words. But the boys were jubilant, their voices shrill, their movements abrupt and erratic. One of them approached the huge blue flyer and stood directly in front of it with an air of pygmy defiance. "Bush to Memphis," he shouted. "Let's all go to Memphis." "Oh, the hell with Memphis," shouted another. "No kiddin', I want to go somewhere," pleaded the first. His voice trailing off from its defiant pitch and sinking to a childlike whine. "I'm sick and tired of school. I'm going to quit school and go to Memphis." The bus passengers were now streaming out of the cafe and returning to their seats in the bus. It was very late at night, an hour when no kind of behavior seems extraordinary, and the tired travelers only blinked their eyes and muttered sleepily as the drunk boy staggered among them, catching at their sleeves and shrilly inquiring, "Who's going to Memphis? I want to know about Memphis." Luke rose from the fence rail and went over to the boy, swaying in the glare of the giant headlights. "I'm going to Memphis," he said quietly. "What do you want to know about it?" The boy caught Luke's sleeve and peered anxiously into his face. "How is it down there? Like they say in songs?" Luke shook off his hand, fighting down an impulse to strike him. "It's pretty hot this time of year," he replied, still quietly. "But otherwise a very nice town. On the river, and the people are friendly. Southern provincialism's a rather good sort. People are not constantly keyed up for a competitive struggle, you know. Ideas of social justice rather blurred. But that's inevitable where there's two races that can't be mixed and each of them scared of the other. Take the Arabs and the Jews. We don't have things like that. Front Street and the Levee. They're pretty swell in Memphis, especially on Saturday mornings when the country people come into town from all the three states: Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee. The college boy laughed and caught again at Luke's sleeve. Who said I was interested in all that? Nobody. I'm just trying to sell you a ticket. How is the nightlife down there? Very beautiful at night, said Luke. 5-point standards with frosted globes all up and down Main Street. Gorgeous theatrical signs and... Oh, no, I mean the nightlife. The dancing. The... Dancing? They have dancing on the roofs of the Peabody and Claridge hotels. And there's House of Music. Sounds swell over the radio. I've never... And the girls. The girls. The motor of the bus had started roaring. The pavement beneath them shook with its thunder. Luke heard his voice rising in tone. Here's my ticket, he screamed. 5 or 6 of the college boys were now swarming around him. He extended toward the boy the torn white stub. Here's my ticket to Memphis. It's yours for $2. Understand? Paid $7 for it myself. All yours for just $2. Now the bus driver was yelling something. So was the cafe proprietor. The motor's savage roar had infected them all, even the sleepy passengers. They leaned out of the windows and laughed and hooted and made angry gestures. The air thundered and shook. The very walls and pavements of the streets seemed to be roused to fury. The college boys pressed in close around Luke, clutching him by the coat lapel and the sleeves. Their breaths were strong with beer, their eyes and their faces demonically inflamed. Some of them shoved him toward the bus door. Others dragged him backwards. The ticket stub dropped from his fingers and was trampled underfoot. He felt terribly frightened, and with a desperate effort broke away. He darted in front of the roaring engine. The street was a momentary plethora of sound and motion, then faded behind him. He splashed through water that seemed knee-deep. Then darkness gathered about him. The other side of the street. An areaway between 2 buildings. This is madness. Lost my mind. But what do I care? Leaned against dark wall and breathed. Bricks rough and damp to the back of his head. Cool wind playing upon his face. Smell of wet grass. Coolness. Cool darkness. The night after fever. When he opened his eyes a few moments later, the bus was gone. The confusion was over. Light glimmered faintly in the puddles scattered about the tarred street surface. Forms inside the brilliantly lighted cafe moved diffusely behind the rain-blurred and beaded windows. Music drifted out faintly. An old tune, Stardust, very pleasant to hear. The scene was attractive. Symphonic completeness that reality seldom achieves. A picture by Turner, Rainy Nocturne, might be the title. He went back across the street and advanced purposefully through wet grass, knee-high, toward the illuminated billboard. Stark Navel's glittering black head grew larger as he approached. The face was outlined with a single stroke of purple paint. The mustache looked like the whiskers of a cat. Meow, he purred mockingly as he drew closer. Jane Barlow's hair was yellow. Her lips were crimson daubs. She was smiling at Neville with mouth open, waiting to be kissed. The name of the picture was Sacramento. What was Sacramento? A city on the western coast. No kiddin', I want to go somewhere. That was what the drunk boy had said. What did it matter where? Memphis or Chicago or Sacramento or Champaign, Illinois? A strange town in the middle of night with a cricket chirping in wet grass and electric lights shining on a painted poster of a coming show. What did it matter what place? Any place that the night covered was all right for lying down and going to sleep. He advanced still closer to the painted poster, leaned against it with both palms, kissed the purple brushstroke at the base of Jane Barlow's throat, gave Stark Navel a loud bird, then stretched himself out in the tall grass somewhere near the spot where the cricket was chirping, and turned his face away from the lighted poster and fell into a sound, blissful sleep. Circa 1936, not previously published.